Hello YouTube. Today I'm going to be doing a more depressing kind of YouTube video. All of my other fellowship videos have been way too enthusiastic and positive for my liking, so now I'm going to do the opposite. This video is going to be very depressing, and you're all going to be very miserable after watching it, but at the end of the day, that's just how life is, isn't it? Welcome to the real world. Life is pain. Every day feels like hell. Nobody is ever truly happy or satisfied in this life, regardless of what their circumstances are. And at the end of the day, we're all just patiently waiting for the cold embrace of death. So, with that said, I would like to tell you how I'm currently feeling about this game. The more I play Fellowship, the more unhappy I get. This game just makes me sad. And it makes me sad for the same reason that I was sad back in 2015 when I quit World of Warcraft. The reason I was sad back then is because I saw a game with incredible potential. But I had extreme doubts at the time that World of Warcraft would ever reach its potential or come anywhere close. Which is also how I feel about Fellowship right now. However, with World of Warcraft, as the expansions went on, there was a point where you could clearly see that the game was never going to reach its full potential. I first noticed it in Warlords of Draenor. That's when I was telling myself that this game is never going to be good ever again. But depending on what type of player you are, and depending on what type of content you're interested in, you might have noticed it sooner or later than I did. But Fellowship is different. It's similar to WoW in that it's a game with a lot of potential, but the difference is Fellowship is so goddamn close to reaching its full potential and genuinely becoming a great game that people will play for years to come. Now, it's not as great as World of Warcraft was back in the day because WoW was kind of like lightning in a bottle at the time, and it had a lot of money behind it. It wasn't just some indie trash, but Fellowship is a good game. And I do genuinely believe that this game is about 80% of the way to being an amazing game, because everything about this game is just so good, except for one very important thing: the actual core of the game, Mythic Plus. I promise you, the reason why this game is going to lose most of its players over the long term is entirely because Mythic Plus is a bad system. And I'm not going to talk about every reason why Mythic Plus is a bad system in this video because I've talked about it before, but I do want to focus on the main reason why Mythic Plus is bad. Because if the developers can fix that, then I do believe it'll be enough to make this game great. And on top of that, every other flaw of Mythic Plus will be kind of alleviated a little bit if the main issue is fixed. So here's the main issue. The biggest flaw of Mythic Plus, in my opinion, is that it forces everyone who plays the game to get hard stuck. Everybody, regardless of how good they are, hits the brick wall, and that is just absolutely terrible for the game. Because hitting the brick wall feels awful. And for the majority of players, the brick wall is when the game is going to stop being fun. If you don't believe me on that, let me tell you about the first time that the majority of players hit a brick wall in World of Warcraft. Do any of you remember when that was? Because I certainly do. I experienced the whole thing. It was the point where Blizzard started losing subscribers for the first time. The beginning of Cataclysm. Now you might be saying, wait a second, that doesn't sound right. People have been getting hard stuck in raids since the beginning of time. And yes, that is true, except the thing is, raiding is the end of the game. It's the final mountain that you have to climb, and it's also a coordinated effort with a lot of players. So getting hard stuck there isn't nearly as bad or impactful. But in Cataclysm, people did not just get hard stuck in raids. The majority of people got hard stuck in dungeons. And the reason that happened is because the dungeons were overtuned as fuck, especially for solo queue. Now, it wasn't the first time that the dungeons were overtuned. TBC had really overtuned dungeons as well, but the difference was, in Cataclysm, you actually had to do the dungeons, and you had to do them a lot. In TBC, you only really needed to do the heroic dungeons for your attunement. So here's what went down back then. In order to raid in Cataclysm, you needed the gear from the dungeons, and you needed the gear from the badges which came from doing the dungeons, and you also needed a reputation from doing dungeons. Which means if you weren't able to do the dungeons, then you weren't able to gear up, and if you can't gear up, then you can't raid, because the raids were also overtuned out the ass. So you really did need as much gear as you could possibly get your hands on. But the problem was, every single time people would queue up for the dungeons to get the gear, they would have an incredibly miserable experience. Now, I used to read the WoW forums every single day back then, which is not something that I'm proud of, but what I saw was a lot of complaints. And the things people were complaining about were very similar to the complaints that you see about Fellowship. There were complaints about toxicity, about people leaving after a single wipe. A lot of players in general didn't feel like they were good enough to do the dungeons in Cataclysm, especially healer players, because Cata dungeons were designed to punish healers incredibly hard, which probably wasn't intentional, mind you, but that's just what ended up happening. Fellowship has a similar thing going on, but with tanks. Tanks are the ones who get punished the hardest because Mythic Plus, as a system, puts an extreme amount of responsibility onto tank players, which means most people who are trying to play tank for the first time or just kind of learning the game in general are going to get shit on. But anyways, the result of all of those issues that people were having in Cata dungeons was that the clear rates were incredibly low. Everybody was stressed out, burnt out. Nobody wanted to play a healer, and most people simply could not realistically gear up in the dungeons unless they either had the mental fortitude of the gods or they had a good group of friends to run with. So what happened? Did people rise to the challenge and improve at the game so that they could clear these dungeons? No, they just quit. Because that's what happens when people get hard stuck. They tend to just quit rather than trying to push through it. And I do not blame them one bit, because being hard stuck is fucking miserable. And the earlier that you get hard stuck, the more miserable it is. In fact, I suspect that a much higher percentage of the population in Fellowship is going to quit than the percentage of people that quit in Cataclysm, because there's literally nothing else to do in this game other than dungeons. In WoW, you at least have other things you can do, but in this game, if you hit the brick wall, your only options are to 1, improve at the game, which isn't realistically going to happen, nor should it even need to happen to begin with. 2, you can play an alt that will also inevitably get hard stuck as well. Or 3, you can quit the game, which based on World of Warcraft's history is certainly what people are going to do. So, if Mythic Plus as a system forces people to get hard stuck, and if it forces the majority of players to get hard stuck sooner rather than later, which it does, then it's just a bad system. That is what needs to change in this game. And it really annoys me when I see people and the developers themselves discussing whether players should be getting hard stuck in Adept or in Champion or wherever, because that is not the problem with the game. The problem is people getting hard stuck to begin with. In this game, there's only one point where you should be getting hard stuck, and that is Eternal, because Eternal is the end of the game. It's also infinitely scaling, so it kind of makes sense to get hard stuck there. But before Eternal, nobody should ever get hard stuck, regardless of how good they are. It should just take a lot longer to progress from Contender to Paragon if you're not as good at the game. Think about it in terms of vanilla WoW leveling. Why did people enjoy leveling in vanilla WoW so much back in the day? The reason is because leveling in vanilla WoW was a journey that you would go on at your own pace. Nobody ever got hard stuck at level 20 or level 30 or whenever. Nobody ever felt like they had to be some god gamer just to be able to progress through the game. People would just go on their own little adventure and they'd have a fun time doing it, regardless of how long it took. And that is exactly how Contender to Paragon should be. It should be a journey that you go on with every hero that you play, and at no point should you be getting hard stuck. So now let's talk about what's causing people to get hard stuck in the first place. Are the dungeons just overtuned like they were in Cataclysm? No. In fact, I think the dungeons are perfectly fine as they are. the developers have done an excellent job at tuning and designing these dungeons. I literally have no complaints whatsoever. The problem isn't the content, it's the timer. Having to time the dungeons to progress further is what is creating the brick wall for players. So that is what needs to change. Now, I'm not going to pretend like I have the perfect magical fix for the timer, because I don't. And I honestly don't care enough to try and come up with the perfect fix, because it's the developer's job to figure that out. But the timer is the problem. That much is clear. And I've seen people suggest to remove the timer from Contender to Paragon, but keep it in Eternal. I've seen people suggest to just make the timer a lot longer or change the function of the timer. And I could see a world where all of those suggestions could work out. But at the end of the day, the timer is what's causing people to get hard stuck. So that is the problem that needs to be fixed. If they can find a good way to change it, then this game will truly be able to reach its potential from what I can tell. I would also personally like to recommend to the developers that they milk the ever-living shit out of Contender to Paragon way more than they're doing right now. Because to me, it feels like the game in its current state is pushing you to get to Eternal as fast as possible, especially on alts. Like, you can literally get to Eternal in one day on an alt because of how all the systems are set up with the gold and the queuing system sending you straight into the capstone dungeons if you have the item level. And that is just so retarded, in my opinion. It shouldn't be like that, because the game, for most players, is literally the journey from Contender to Paragon. So why in the motherfucking ass would you be able to just blast right through it on an alt? It's like having heirlooms in WoW, but on steroids. It's just so stupid. In World of Warcraft, you at least have an argument for skipping the journey, because WoW's endgame tends to be more enjoyable than the leveling experience. But in this game, it's literally the exact opposite. Eternal is literally just bashing your head against a brick wall until the end of time, doing the same content that you've been doing, except without gear upgrades. Why in the hell would you want to push players into doing that type of content as fast as possible? It literally doesn't make any sense at all. Especially since the players who actually enjoy bashing their heads against a brick wall are all sweaty as fuck, and they would be completely fine with the journey from Contender to Paragon being longer, since they're just going to blow right through it anyways, regardless of how long it takes. So those are my two suggestions for making the game truly great. Change the way Mythic Plus works so that people aren't getting hard stuck before Eternal, and milk the ever-living shit out of Contender to Paragon. Make it last a lot longer, especially on alts, because that is the game. That is the fun part of the game for the majority of players. Maybe they can make it so that you have to complete like 50 dungeons in Contender before you can move on to Adept, or something like that. I don't know. It doesn't have to be that. The developers can, figure out a good way to do it. But the point is, they need to do something. Because if they don't do anything, and the Mythic Plus system stays exactly the same way as it is right now, I am certain that they're going to lose at least half of their player base very quickly. And I really don't want that to happen, because this game has so much potential. It would be a real shame if the only players who actually enjoy playing this game in the long term are sweatlords. Because if that's what ends up happening, then it's not going to be a very popular game, is it? But we'll see what happens, I guess. Anyways, that's all I've got for you. Thank you for watching my YouTube video. Bye-bye.